Welcome back, everyone. Great to have you here. As always, really appreciate the support. Today on this Total Wellness Tuesday episode, we are going to be going through how gliadin and gluten, as well as glutamate, are actually causing a lot of the neurological issues, the learning disabilities, the mood-based disorders, inflammation, and so much more in your body. And one of the big reasons why I'm bringing this up is that we've been working with a lot of children and adults in our practice who don't understand why from one day to another, their mood is high or low, or their brain fog is higher, or they have more allergy-based symptoms, or they just don't even feel like themselves. They say, it doesn't even feel like me inside of my body. And what I want to do is really help you understand how the nervous system can be stimulated. We call it excitatory. It can be stimulated by certain neurotransmitters that are actually a result of the foods that we are eating. And the real tough matter here is that it's not always listed in food-based products. So I'm actually going to give you all of the foods, and a lot of the notes are all here today to make it super easy for you at StephenCabral.com/2020. So just go to StephenCabral.com/2020, and I'm going to give you the most common foods to watch out for. But really, what I would love you to do, and I know that sometimes you're walking around, of course, listening to the podcast, you might be in your car, but maybe have a second listen. Maybe write down some of these notes that are so important for us to understand for ourselves, because as adults, we are just as susceptible, but also for children, because I've seen it. And I can see this in real life working. And so I have the knowledge in terms of studying the science, yes, and you will too after listening to this episode. But then you'll see it play out, and you'll start to say, oh, wow, what's going on with these kids after they have these types of foods? And they're not acting like themselves, or they're not acting, of course, as the best version of themselves, because they're not themselves. They are under the influence of these certain neurotoxins, which we're going to talk about are gluten, glutamate, yeast, and a few others. I'll be really getting more into yeast on a future episode and why it's not the health food that we really think it is, but we're going to save that one for another day. So for those people that might be new to what gluten is, what I want to do is link up some previous episodes that I've done at StephenCabral.com/2020, because we're just going to do a really quick 1 minute on what gluten is, but then really the devastating effects of it and glutamate. So I'm going to link up what those are if you haven't, again, listened to in-depth shows on what gluten is at StephenCabral.com/2020. So when we're looking at, let's say you're dealing with right now headaches and inflammation, high blood pressure, even high cholesterol, the beginning phases of dementia or Alzheimer's, neurological issues, maybe like an MS, maybe towards an MS, maybe towards a lupus, autoimmune issues in general, or you have skin rashes, allergies, and even a lot of mood-based issues, such as tantrums in children, or even tics in children, learning disabilities, ADD, ADHD, for some diagnosis. And again, I know we're giving different names to diagnosis, but again, we're just talking about brass tacks here on this podcast. We can always get more into the science. I always link up scientific research for you on these pages, but we want to have real talk, right? I want to talk to you just as if you were sitting right across from me in my practice. And I do speak as a real, regular person rather than all the medical jargon, which honestly, nobody cares to hear, right? Only colleagues love to talk in all the big words and fun words, and we can do that another time. That's certainly not what this podcast is all about. So let's get into it right now. What is gluten in general? Well, gluten is just a general name. We have to understand that. Like, gluten is not a special thing. It's not. It's actually a catch-all phrase. So gluten is a broader term for any protein, right? For the proteins found in wheat and in rye and in barley and gluten-containing wheat forms, right? So those types of grains, that's where you're going to get it from. All right. But the interesting thing is this: gluten is added to a lot of other products, such as, well, let me give you the real gluten products first, right? So you're thinking to yourself, okay, wheat and rye and barley and other grains like that. Well, it doesn't include gluten-free grains, which we've talked about in previous shows, and I'm going to give you those shows as well. But you're talking about that, and you say, oh, well, I'm not really eating a lot of those. But you have to understand, it's in pizza and pasta and pastries and muffins and a lot of, obviously, most bread, and a lot of those favorite comfort-based foods. But it's also used as a thickener in products that you probably may not have thought of. It's used in a lot of toothpaste as a thickener. It's used in ice cream as a thickener. It's used in soy sauce. And you might say, why are they adding gluten to these products? What you have to understand is gluten is like a gum. It's literally gives substance, weight. It can be used as a thickener, a glue. It binds things together, gives it shape. So it's why, a very high gluten bread has that mouthfeel to it, right? It's like it's sticky, it's chewy, and people really like that. So it's easy to cook with. It's easy to make into pasta. A lot of times, I remember back in the day, I had to go gluten-free for various gut-based issues a long time ago when I was 17. And when I had to do that, there was very few gluten-free options. So there was a couple of rice pastas. And back then, when you would cook rice pasta, it would literally crumble because they didn't know how to make it properly. And gluten, it would typically be the binder, right? It would be holding all that pasta together, and it still is, of course, to this day. So we have to understand this. Gluten is inflammatory to all, and I did a podcast on that. It's just your level of inflammation, right? So gluten is an inflammatory food, right? It's an inflammatory protein. That's a better way to put it. But it doesn't affect everyone the same way. The more gluten intolerant you are, we could say all humans are gluten intolerant. And that's because to a varying degree, it increases inflammation in the gut and may increase gut permeability. And again, I have a show on that. I will link it up here today. But for some, about 50% of the population, it increases exponentially the level of inflammation in your body. And that inflammation moves from your gut. So you might be thinking, well, what does this have anything to do with learning disabilities, dementia, neurological issues, et cetera? Wouldn't it just stay in your gut? Well, the interesting thing is it doesn't. Okay. It starts with inflammation in the gut. Yes. Right. And well, there's 26 feet of intestinal tract, right? About 21 feet of small intestine and about 5-6 feet of large intestine. Again, it just depends on the size of the human. So what do we have? Well, we've got a lot of intestinal tract. Because if you were to lay out that intestinal tract and all the villi and microvilli, right, all the enterocytes, when you flatten it out, it's about the size of a tennis court, if you can believe it. That's how much flesh there is, how much tissue there is. All of that can be inflamed from gluten, okay? And again, it's varying levels. Now, first of all, I want to say this. Do I eat some gluten in my diet? Yes, I do now because I healed my gut. How often do I eat gluten? Once a week, about once a week. That's about it. Now, again, you might be more tolerant. You might be able to have it 2 times a week or 3 times a week, but typically not more than that, all right? But we're talking about people, though, that are suffering from autoimmune issues, kids with learning disabilities, neurological issues, skin rashes, brain fog, hormone issues like thyroid, et cetera. We have to be really careful with saying it's okay to eat these foods because you'll hear a lot of practitioners say, oh, it's no big deal. It's only if you have celiac. No, it's not only if you have celiac. If you have celiac, you have a full-blown autoimmune issue when you eat gluten. But there's, again, conventional medicine loves to say it's all or nothing, right? You either have high cholesterol or you don't. Well, what's cholesterol that's 1 point less than what's considered high cholesterol, right? Or let's say you have blood pressure of 134/82. Okay, you're 1 point away on the systolic side of blood pressure at 135 from being diagnosed with high blood pressure, right? I mean, this is crazy, right? There's obviously degrees, and there's gluten intolerance to a small degree, a moderate degree, a high degree, and then there's celiac disease, okay? It's not just all or nothing, but inflammation is inflammation. And when it's compounded over time, what happens? Well, the gut gets inflamed, okay? It increases what? Immune cell activation, which causes what? More inflammation, which can cause what? Autoimmune issues, which can also inflame the brain. I'm going to get to that in just a moment, right? Just a moment, but just keep in mind, your gut is directly connected to your brain. I know that makes no sense at all because your gut is down here. If you're watching this on video, right? Your belly, right? It's actually believe it or not, an inch or so above your belly button and then below, not including your stomach. But it is connected to your brain through the vagal nerve, right? Or the vagus nerve. And it's actually, if you look right behind your ear, that's where it runs up all the way down to your gut. And your gut sends signals to your brain. And your brain also sends signals to your gut. I have a podcast called The Gut-Brain Axis. I'll link that up as well if that's of interest to you. Okay, so let's get into it just a little bit more because I want you to understand there is a direct connection because we're going to need to make changes. But the good news is we can. And it's not that difficult for you or your kids as well. So gluten is one thing, but one of the main proteins in gluten is called gliadin. So again, I want you to know these things so when you read them that you have more knowledge behind it. Gliadin, gliadin. Okay, that's how it's spelled. And gliadin, when it's broken down, it actually breaks down to two amino acids called proline and glutamine. 30 to 35% of the protein in wheat is glutamic acid. Glutamine in turn can break down into glutamate, which is an amino acid. Why does, and this happens mainly in the small intestine. Why does this matter? Well, because glutamate can come from your gluten intake. Okay, so let's break this down a little further. When you eat gluten, the molecules, remember, gluten's a catch-all, okay? One of those proteins in the gluten is called gliadin. And gliadin is made up of proline and glutamine. And glutamine breaks down into glutamate or glutamic acid. Well, glutamic acid, we have to understand, has to be removed from the body as well. Some people don't clear it as well, genetically. That's why genetics matter, right? They matter, but they're only there on the outside. And it's not going to be triggered on a low gluten or no gluten diet. So again, I want you to understand that, right? Because I have this genetic susceptibility. I learned it the hard way, very hard way, for about 27 years, right? I was gluten-free by about 21, 22 years old, so I learned it by then, but still. So what is all this talk about glutamate? Well, now that we know that glutamine can break down from gluten to glutamate, now we can begin to understand the neurological component, and here's why. Because glutamate is a excitatory neurotransmitter, at least a precursor, which means this. It excites the nervous system, which excites the brain. Think about this, getting overly excited as a child in not a good way, right? They can't control literally what's going on inside of their body, and they're acting out with screaming, with yelling, with some type of tantrum. Right? That's a child. What would it look like an adult? Well, it could go the opposite direction. It could go brain fog, or it could go really severe irritability or angry. It just depends where your nervous system goes to. That's some of that genetic susceptibility. But what you're susceptible is this byproduct that you're having a very difficult time clearing from your body, right? That's the glutamate. Well, the glutamate, as I said, is an excitatory neurotransmitter. And what does it do? It essentially wipes out or eventually lowers a lot of your natural anti-anxiety based neurotransmitters. So what do you end up with? You end up with an anxious child or an anxious adult, which leads to higher levels of stress. That stress throws off the hormones in your body as well as your immune system. And over time, this glutamate, which is also inflammatory, especially coming from gluten, begins to affect the nervous system, your gut, and your brain. So I hope that you start to see that this is all connected, that conventional medicine treats all of these things separate, but they're not. They are all connected. What we put into our body matters. Our microbiome balance matters, because the worse your microbiome, the worse this is exacerbated by, right? And this was a direct quote. Neurological complications are found in up to 50% of patients with a gluten intolerance. That's high. All of these things leading to autoimmune issues as well as neurodegeneration. This means degeneration of the nervous system, and we can include in that dementia, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's as it progresses too far. That's why nervous system degeneration or brain degeneration does not happen overnight. People are like, oh, I got Alzheimer's at early onset Alzheimer's at late 50s or early 60s. Okay, yeah, it might be early onset in terms of symptoms, but it's been being created in your body for the last 30 years. It literally doesn't even happen within a few years. And we're talking about years of assault on the body, right? So let me give you a couple more interesting things about glutamate, and then I'm going to give you some what to do. So we talked about where glutamate comes from. It's literally a breakdown of amino acids. And a lot of people say, oh, well, it's just MSG, which is monosodium glutamate. Okay, monosodium glutamate, a lot of us know, is not a good thing to add to food, right? It gives that sweetness, definitely increases flavor, but it also increases your hunger, meaning like you can eat more and more and more of it. Okay, so the problem is that in really susceptible people, they'll kind of know because it'll immediately cause a headache or a spike in blood pressure. They'll start to gain weight right away the next day after that meal. They might right away feel some type of, they call it psychosis. It's literally in quotations. That's what WebMD calls it, not my name. But you'll feel right away an immediate change, and you'll see it in a child. It will kick up a lot of those ASD issues, ADHD issues, or mood emotional based issues. But it's not just from gluten. So that's why I want to really make this clear. Glutamate also comes from yeast, added yeast to ingredients. So a lot of people that don't feel well after eating certain fermented based foods that have yeast, certain forms of alcohol, or if there's yeast extracts, or they're taking some type of vitamin with yeast extracts in it. I'm not saying it's bad for everyone. Again, I'm just stating the facts. I keep myself unbiased when talking about this. Soy extracts or soy sauce, certain protein isolates, certain forms of cheese, some nuts like walnuts, processed meats like a charcuterie based board, right? They don't feel as well after eating that. What about some people? Tomatoes, some fruit juices like grape juice, high purine fish such as shellfish, and mushrooms as well as corn. So I will put this list at StephenCabral.com/2020 because these are some interesting ones. Now, it's not a lot of foods. That's the nice thing is you could just say, okay, for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, I'm going to eliminate the foods that I just heard today on these podcasts. I'm going to eliminate gluten and I'm going to eliminate the 10 foods or so that I just said. And you're probably not drinking fruit juice anyways. You're probably not using a lot of soy sauce or soy extracts. You may or may not be eating a lot of cheese. You might need to cut out mushrooms. You might need to cut out corn. You might need to cut out shellfish, but not huge game changers, right? You could try that for a couple weeks, see how you feel, see how your kids feel, go gluten-free, cut out a few of these. That's what it's all about. But you have to understand this. So you might say, well, how do you have the genetic predisposition to this? And now you can eat gluten again. And you know that I can eat some tomatoes. I can eat all these things again. Like I can eat all these things and I'm not going to have the same issues I used to have in the past. Why is that? You have to remember that it all goes back to the rain barrel effect. Everything goes back to the rain barrel effect because everything's genetics. But you have to understand is your genetics almost don't matter until you've overflowed your rain barrel. And yes, I wrote a book called The Rain Barrel Effect, but I didn't make that up. That's human physiology. We're just starting to learn about it, meaning that if you don't eat a lot of glutamate over the last couple of days, right, or gliadin or any of these glutamate-based products, and then you have it for one meal, and then you don't have it again for the next couple of days, once you're better, once that gut microbiome is balanced, you're most likely not going to feel anything, like literally anything. That goes for some nightshades. That goes for all of these things. We've seen people in our practice that are celiac, that have celiac autoimmune issue, get their gut better, and they eat something contaminated with gluten, and they're fine. Should they make a habit of eating gluten? No. But they're fine. Why is that? They've dramatically emptied their rain barrel, and you can do the same exact thing. You have to understand, the way that we get sick is a simple process, not always easy, but a simple process to understand. You have too much of something that fills up the rain barrel effect, right? That fills it up. You have too much of a toxin, in this case, glutamate or gluten. Or you have too little of something. Those are your vitamins and minerals and other things that help with this, right? So let's say this. You have candida overgrowth, you've got SIBO, you've got H. pylori, and it makes your gut even worse. Well, what if you were to remove those? Those are toxins. You can do that. You can absolutely do that, right? And what if you didn't have enough magnesium, you didn't have enough zinc, you didn't have enough of your B vitamins that all help with these reactions? Well, what would it do to get more B6 in there? Some magnesium, some zinc. What would it do? Base levels of vitamin D, base levels of omega-3s. Well, you'd be better able to deal with this onslaught in the future. That's the nice thing. And that is how we get people well again. In an ideal world, you would run the big 5 labs, right? That's the ideal world. Or if you think you have gut issues, run the gut issues. These are all over at equi.life, equi.life, or work with a local integrative health practitioner. Your choice. Honestly, whatever works for you, I'm fine with. I just want you to know that there's an answer. There's no doubt about it, there's an answer. And the last thing I wanted to give you is this, is that there are easy things now. I couldn't say that 20 years ago when I was doing all this stuff, right? But I can say it now. I can say it now for sure. There are easy and clean gluten-free alternatives. You can't just buy any bread. I'm going to link it up here today why gluten-free is not always healthy for you. But you can do things like we do in my family. For example, I will get some cassava tacos and use that instead of a corn taco shell. Or we'll do that instead of wheat. We can get some brown rice or even a chickpea or something else based pasta. You can do these things and they're actually very easy to do for a 1-for-1. And you might say to yourself, oh, well, you know, I can't have my favorite fish, but you can. Remember, you can still have your cod, you can still have mackerel, you can still have the wild salmon. All of those are okay. I'm just saying maybe we want to go easy on the shellfish, right? And a lot of the higher purine foods like the anchovies, even though they're high in omega-3, we just have to back off for just a bit. How do you do with them? And another one, I always talk about what? My Purple Crush smoothie in the morning. And if you haven't downloaded it, it's free. My smoothie report's completely free. And what does it have in it? Blueberries. Why? Blueberries are one of those things that are fantastic at being able to push the balance back for low glutamate-based foods, give you a lot of antioxidants to help squelch a lot of the inflammation and free radical damage, and so much more. I can honestly talk about this for hours, but I need to make sure that I stay to my time limit so that hopefully you're tuning in every day. Remember, the Cabral concept, health in general, integrative health is not about listening to one podcast, reading one book, one article, and saying that's all there is to know. It's not. This is a journey that we're on. Begin the journey by omitting some of these foods that may not be the best for you. Start to do things like a functional medicine detox. Start to run things like the Big 5 labs or some gut testing like the Candida metabolic and vitamins test. I mean, start to do the things that are going to move you forward. You learn from one, you do a little bit better, you learn from the next, you do even a little bit better. That's how it works. So hopefully today's show is helpful. If you know anybody with a lot of the symptoms that I was talking about today, whether an adult or a child, please just feel free to share this show with them. There's nothing to purchase. They can work with any integrative health practitioner in the world. They can just use the diet guide that I'm giving you today at stephencabral.com/2020 of what foods to eliminate. Let's just share this information. That's the way to do it. The media is not going to do it, that's for sure, right? They're just going to tell you that all the things that you're eating or whatever it is okay. It's not. Again, we can make it easy. We can make it simple for people, but they first need to get this knowledge. So again, always appreciate the shares, the reviews of the show, and all that. Once again, thank you so much. Take care, and I'll talk with you tomorrow.